You and I have a divine appointment right now to talk about you. You're going through some challenges. I know that. You know that. But God knows it. That there's a strategy for you to break out of the cycle you're in right now. In fact, we call that a slingshot strategy. You may not know what direction to move in, but God already has a provision there for you. I'm with my team right now with Level 10 Living. I'm Lance Wallnow. This is my son, Carl Wallnow. That's Mercedes Sparks. We are going to be your coaches. We're like the Sherpa guides that are going to help you get up to the top of the mountain. We've been working together on the mastery of certain principles that when you apply them to your life, the practical tools we give you today are going to enable you to get clear on what it is you need to do next. And more importantly, you're going to walk away with the mindset that you're not alone. There is hope. There is provision. God has factored everything going on in the world into your destiny, and it's now time for your blueprint to become fully manifest. Welcome to the Level 10 broadcast, which is probably my favorite material because no matter what is going on in the world, this is the stuff that gets you through it. You know, the interesting thing about doing analysis with news, which is one of our more popular shows, is I'm describing what's happening, but I'm not necessarily helping people to navigate a path forward through what's happening. This material is what does that. No matter what goes on, there's going to be a lot of rolling blackouts in the United States economically in the future. It's going to happen because of decision-making that's going on in Washington. And for the people of God, the people of faith, it really challenges us to make manifest what we believe. I remember something that Kenneth Copeland talked about maybe 20 years ago. It's a preacher, a faith preacher, and he said how he suddenly got hit one day with the sober realization he owed $1 million of broadcasting bills. I mean, $1 million. And he said he had to have a real Jesus meeting where he said, Lord, we got $1 million worth of broadcast expenses, and I don't have the money. And the Lord reminded him, how did you get built up to the point where you could get into $1 million worth of broadcasting? It started with you believing God for your first suit. It started for you believing God for a new set of tires. In other words, what got you here is the fundamentals. And what will get you out of this crisis is the fundamentals. And he realized that what he did was he started giving. He started believing that as he sowed, he would reap. As he gave, he began to gather. That the way that you increase in the kingdom is a strange rule. The more that you give away, the more you create this kind of a cosmic cycle where something comes back to you. So he started with Gloria, his wife, praying, and instead of panicking about the money they owed, they began to sow into the places God called them to sow into. And he literally believed and confessed and spoke and prayed and gave his way out of debt. And once he got through that cycle, they hit a whole new plateau of giving, a whole new plateau of growth, to the point now where the guy's, like a $100 million operation. And he takes the money given to him and he actually re-sows it out into other ministries because he's got his needs met. So he's managing an account, which is what he calls twice sowed seed. People give to him and he's investing in a whole bunch of other nonprofit things. But I want to say that now because there could be hard times. Everything that we're teaching works. What we're telling you, it wasn't baked in a laboratory of theory. This Level 10 series is how throughout history and throughout the Bible, the practitioners of certain skills and mindsets were able to work their way out into abundance and into God's plan. It starts with this. Seek God for his plan for your life. Because God factored economics, wars, famines, plagues, whatever goes on planet Earth, God factored it in to your destiny so that it's all you're guaranteed success. It's not like suddenly heaven gets confused and goes, well, we didn't see that coming. We'll have to rewrite the script. You're already got, What's interesting to me about destiny is it never actually, when you get there, looks like what you thought it would. But the good news is it looks better than you thought it would. It's just different than you thought it would. So the disciples we talked about in the last episode all saw visions of glory. They saw themselves ruling and sitting on thrones in the Knesset in Israel, basically. And Jesus said, oh, you guys got thrones. It's a far more ambitious project I've got for you. It's going to be eternity, not a couple of years here in the Middle East. And it's going to be ruling over a whole globe, not just this real estate the size of New Jersey. Jesus had vision for what the Father wanted to do that was far higher than the disciples' vision, but their obedience and their cooperation gradually led them to a realization that it was a bigger destiny than what they had in mind for themselves, that he was inviting them into. So with that thought in mind, I want to talk about the Level 10 content. And you can get this, by the way, at level10living.com. If you use the promo code podcast, you get 20% off. This is, I put kids through college for, Pepperdine was like $50,000 a year. And, one of my children went through that, and I said, man, for about a couple of $100, I could put together a curriculum that would be good for life. And here colleges are making you go into debt for maybe won't even have a job when you come out. So I put the work together for you so that it's like a college degree or a PhD in destiny. That's how you got to look at it. But you got to meet me in the content working with me. So Carl, Mercedes, you guys, you're the coach, you're the practitioner in terms of entrepreneurial practitioner. Let's dig in on this idea that it's more important for you to know what God is calling you to manifest than for you to have to know how all the details are going to work. I find a lot of people, they freeze because in the West especially, we prize knowledge, strategy, that kind of stuff. And strategy is important. But what's more important than that is knowing what it is that God's called you to do as an outcome. So for instance, to back up my point, I'll give you 2 verses in the Bible that David, when he went forth to slay Goliath, he had an outcome in mind. His intention and the outcome were connected. He was going to kill the giant. He did not have the methodology figured out yet. Nor did he need to have the plan clear in order to do the destiny. So for many of you, you'd be better off really incubating, marinating, and building in you the image of what the Father's calling you to manifest than exerting your energy in trying to come up with the latest YouTube video on how to. Because I'll give you an example. Personally, I'll go to David first. David goes to Saul and says, I'm going to kill the giant. And Saul says, you can't. First of all, you're too small. You're too young. You're inexperienced. He gives him all the reasons why he can't do what God called him to do. But David was already fully persuaded. Catch that language. I'm going to use it again in a moment. Fully persuaded to do it. So David puts on Saul's armor. And the Bible says he tried to use Saul's sword and his armor, but it was very awkward for him. He just didn't feel comfortable. It wasn't his skill. David's skill was with a slingshot. So it was important that he developed the skill. It wasn't important yet that he knew how it was going to be applied. There's a big key for you. Develop your skills. Develop your talent. Develop your ability, because you never know how it's going to be applied. But here's the deal. David knew the giant was coming down. He didn't know how. And he put aside the sword and the armor, and he went and he picked up his slingshot. Slingshot, he understood, because he had already practiced with a slingshot. And as it ends up, you know the story. He takes down the giant with a stone. And one could argue that was a far more, it was Napoleonic, it was Caesar, it was Alexander, it was a technology that was perfectly adapted to someone small taking out someone big, not in close quarter contest with muscle against muscle, but at a distance with a rock. It's like using a gun, the Indiana Jones scene where the guy comes out with a sword and he's spinning it around, and Indiana Jones realizes, oh, what the heck, he pulls his pistol out and shoots him.
I read that was improv. I don't know if it's true, but I read that.
I read that too. I read that too.
He was tired of running it, and he was just like, all right, if I was Indy, I would just shoot.
It was like a joke. He said, let me try this.
Yeah.
And it's like they kept it because it was intuitively right. So Carl and Mercedes, let you jump in on this because I know that we had a little debate about this earlier, but I better give you another verse just in case you guys give me pushback on this. I say, how isn't as important as what? Knowing what you're called to do or if you're called to build a business, if you're called to get a job, if you're called to write a book, if you're called to develop, whatever it is, how to do it is important, but not yet. What's important is what you're called to manifest, getting clear from God on what it looks like. So here's the verse I want to give you. It's going to be in Hebrews chapter 11. If you got a Bible, go find that book, Hebrews. Hebrews, and it says here, I got chapter 11. It's one of my favorite verses here. It says, starting there with verse 8, it says, by faith, when he was called, Abraham went out, going to a place where he was to receive his inheritance, and he went out, not knowing where he was going. Now, I got a funny translation here, probably, New American Standard. Abraham went forth, not knowing where he was going, but by faith he obeyed, going out because God showed him he had land for him. God showed him he was going to have territory. Abraham wasn't sure where it was, but he went forth, not knowing where he was going. But as you said earlier, faith without works is dead. His works were he started walking. And God eventually led him to where his inheritance was. So I want to say again, getting clear on what God's called you to manifest is important. You could lose a job. You could have a hard time getting a job. Like I said, you could have a rolling blackout economically all over the country. Your faith isn't based, certainly, on the wisdom of how the government spends your money. Your faith is based on what God called you to do and how the currency of faith actually will cause you to manifest what that will of God is. Mercedes.
I would argue that faith is an action. That if you read that whole section, that by faith Abraham went, by faith, Sarah conceived. By faith, Rahab received the spies. Every aspect of that section in the Bible is actually a corresponding action. It almost reads like a resume. Like you write your resume, it's like, I developed, da-da-da-da. But when you read that faith section, I believe faith always has corresponding action. Otherwise, it's just hope. Faith is a substance of things hoped for. I can have the hope of that future destiny, but my faith is the thing of me actually exercising action of some sort.
All right, so you're saying that there has to be corresponding action for faith to be catalyzed.
I believe faith is action. I believe faith is the outworking in an action form of some sort, either receiving, going, anything like that. And then I also want to say, too, that it wasn't so much that David just decided he was going to take down Goliath. I mean, what I like about the verse in 1 Samuel 17:26, David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? He was very clear on God is first, God is above everything. Who is this guy that's going to defy the living God? Because the living God's given me power to overcome the bear and the lion before. So I think it's really, when you're clear on your objective and you're clear that God's with you as you're going into that objective, by faith you go and you do things.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to say. To your point, Mercedes, it sounds like the why is important. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that's disgracing Israel? Like what is the why there is that God's people will not be lesser than. We will not be overcome by this Goliath.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that you said earlier, Dad, is how is as important as what? I would throw in why. The why is just as important as what. Personally. Mm-hmm. Secondarily, the skill set that David had developed was more than just a slingshot. He was also incredibly gifted with Psalms and mm-hmm. Proverbs and being able to write poetry and sing songs. And if David hadn't articulated that skill set, then Saul probably would have killed him multiple times in his tent. So it wasn't enough to just be the slingshot master. You also had to have a different skill set that was coming into fruition at a later time.
And I think that's an important point that you're making, in that How did David get access to Saul in the first place? He was his therapist. He played the harp. And that harp and that music was how he had penetrated the strong man's house. He got into the government, not as an employee, because Saul, knowing his character, is very suspicious of, and jealous of anyone with skill. David had demonstrated nothing that could be a threat to Saul. He was his therapist. It's like having a florist or a hairstylist, dealing with royalty. And they don't know that you also can do other stuff. David got access because of a skill that was the harp. Let me take a moment now and say, these ideas, we call it layering. Layering is when you start to build an understanding of one thought on top of another. And that's the architecture of faith. Because we're dealing with what Carl said is the why, is the ultimate question. God doesn't do anything without an ultimate moral purpose. But he has to reveal you the what so that you could see what it looks like. The why helps you to develop the motivation to persevere through the contradiction.
Oh, yeah.
The how becomes the elegant strategy that makes it happen. Whatever's going on in your life right now, you need to know what God wants you to be manifesting in the next chapter. You need to know the why behind it so that you could persevere. And then the what, the how, starts to become more manifest. The strategy, the divine appointment, the piece that you're missing suddenly materializes. That's all level10living.com. That's the reason why we want to talk to you about this project that we're on right now, which is a dedicated channel we're going to put up for you shortly. We're going to give you access to it, where all the lessons are there. So you can catch, if you missed something last week, you can go back and say, oh, this is interesting to me. God's talking to me about this. I need to go back. I promise you, at some point, you're going to encounter the slingshot strategy you need in the material. Because that's how this was discovered. These are all the slingshots I accumulated over 40 years of working with peak performers. The people that I work with, I got a whole group that are the top entrepreneurs in America right now. They have to have a minimum of $25 million to $100 million to be in the group that I'm consulting. So where did they start? They started broke. They started challenged. And all of them are living their life by faith, trusting God right now. So level10living.com, use the promo code podcast, get your 20% off, and join us on the journey, because we're dealing right now on page 13 of the Ultimate Life Strategy, talking about the power of intentionality. And
what does that mean, Lance? Like, when you talk about intentionality, like, what is that?
The power of intentionality means you have to have a very an uncompromising commitment to manifesting the outcome that you want. And this is so key that intentionality, you could say, is the disposition you have that guarantees that what you want to see manifest will show up. The problem is, you could be intending something that is not compatible with what you want to show up. So, for instance, let's say dating. You may want to have a relationship with somebody, and this happens all the time. And you're looking at that person, and you want to have that relationship. And if you're insecure, or you're focused on yourself, or you're overly invested in trying to impress the other person, they may meet you and say, oh, they're so conceited. And you're trying so hard to impress them. Your intention, you thought, was to date them, but your actual intention was to impress them with your competence or coolness or good looks. And so you missed the runway.
Yeah, it was a faulty strategy.
So what was that?
It was a faulty strategy.
It was a faulty strategy because your intention, you didn't realize that you got exactly what you intended. You intended to impress them. You thought your intention was to get a date, but your intention was to, I'll give you another example. This is it seems complex till you see it. When you see it, it's like, aha. So I remember when I started doing public speaking, I would get invited to these multi-level marketing things. And in the multi-level marketing world, it's a weird world. So they got these guys that fly in on their jets and their husband and wife team, and they're kind of like mini celebrities in a artificial kingdom. And they come in and everybody wants to be like them. And they're like, they got their entourage. Everybody wants to touch them and be near them. So I get brought out as the speaker that they brought in. And boy, did I do a great job. I did a great job. Before it was over, those people were like worshiping me, not them. Like I had them. I was their key to breakthrough. I was their. What was my intention? My intention was to do a good enough job to wow the audience so that the person I'm trying to impress wants to work with me. I overdid it. I did so good, they didn't want me back. I'll tell you the truth. I've been to churches where that happened. I've been to Bible schools where it happened. And I can never figure out, how come they never want to invite me? Because I'll hear them talk. They'll go, two or three people that are most influential in my life. And they mention my name. And I think, well, how come they never invite me to do their ministry? I'll tell you why. Because I overshot the runway. What I should have done was made them the celebrity. Now, it's just a little tweak. But it's like, I want to especially say that you know who does that brilliantly? So-and-so. Now, you want to see that in action? I'm describing it, but you know what I've observed? They do it. Have you noticed how they do this? And then you put the spotlight on them. This is what I learned later. My intention was to wow, but that wasn't the outcome I wanted. But I did get my intention. So you got to be careful. So I'll give you one more example, and then just so you can see it, because it's so obvious when you see it. Well, you guys have an example of intentionality? Of how you can end up meeting the wrong need, but you thought you were going to get one outcome, but you always get, here's the point, you always get what you intended. That's the line that infuriated me when I heard Clemmer say it, a friend of mine. He said, Lance, you're always getting what you intended. I go, it's not true. I was trying to do this. He goes, no. At some level, you set it up so you got your intention. You just weren't clear on what you were intending, because what you intend always shows up. Dang, that's a wild thought. Now, it may not be what you want, but it's what you intended.
One thing I want to add is not so much, it's just the first law of power, according to Robert Greene, is don't outshine the master. So if you're brought in to make other people look good and then you end up glowing brighter than they do, they're not going to bring you back because you just outshine the master. You're the one who's making it seem like you're better than they are. Even if that's not your intention, that's still an aspect of it.
Yeah, and I would say that it was your intention to display your shine.
Right.
It's just you didn't calculate how that would work in the outcome that you got. So what I'm saying is your intention is always showing up, but the outcome may not be what you wanted.
And this essentially, just to go back to where we started, when we're talking about, what's your dream, what's your prophetic purpose in life, that there are really practical things that make sure you're not the thing that's tripping you up in your own destiny, because sometimes I think we think it's all external, but I think these examples, Lance, are so great of just how practically sometimes we self-sabotage. We don't even realize we're doing the thing I don't want to do, like the Bible talks about,
Well, and this goes to like we did a few weeks ago, and I could probably discuss it with you guys now here on TV or on the media we're on. It's the work of leaders. Because what we have is we actually have this down to a science where I could look at you in like 20 psychometric scales, 20 areas of leadership with how you are in communicating, with how you make people feel, to how you are in being open-minded, on making decisions, et cetera. And depending on where your data is, I could literally show you where the constraint is that's keeping your company, your business, your mission, your ministry, your music group, your team from going where it wants to go. It's the constraint is always at the top. It's never someplace else. The number one factor that determines the degree of success you have is going to be the dominant constraint in the leadership. And where you're concerned, you're the leader of your own destiny. So you got to know where those constraints are, where those unconscious intentions are actually showing up. All right, real quick. I want to get another verse in here, and it has to do, we only got 2 minutes and 53 seconds left. Go back to Romans again, starting with getting clear on what God called you to do, and then we'll talk about strategies in a moment. Abraham had to produce a baby, and he was too old to have a child. His wife was too old to have a child. So this is just a Bible story, folks. This is like characteristic of God. calling you to do what you don't think you've got the ability to do. But without becoming weak in faith, it says in verse 19, in faith, he contemplated his own body, now as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. Yet, with respect to the promise of God, he did not waver in unbelief, but grew strong in faith, giving glory to God, being fully persuaded that what God had promised, he was able to perform. Circle the words, fully persuaded. Now, somebody will get mad at me for this, but I study all the success literature. I remember Napoleon Hill talked about the two characteristics of every success. He studied Edison, he met with Firestone, he met with Carnegie. He said every remarkable leader in the industrial giants of America and in our past had a definite purpose and a burning desire. They were clear on what they wanted to do, and they were fully persuaded and focused on making it manifest. So I want to talk to you about that. That fully persuaded part, you could say, is where the helmet comes in. If you're not fully persuaded that God is able to do what he said he would do, you'll waver in the barren womb. If you're not fully persuaded, you'll look at the evidence of your age or your lack of education or your lack of money, and you'll actually back up. But if you believe that God is capable and God is showing you this, that's all you need. You see the invisible. Now you've got to build that full persuasion inside of you. We got 45 seconds.
Well, then let me argue that it's not the helmet of salvation, but it's the shield of faith that you need in that instance. Because the shield of faith is what's actually going to be protecting you against these onslaughts from the enemy, from all of these suspicions of doubt or lack of faith. Like you just said, Abraham was not weak in his faith. He was strong in his faith. And that means that he was relying on that shield to protect him and to help sustain the endeavor.
So when those doubts come at you, you raise that shield of faith and you're able to quench the fiery darts. By the way, the word fiery darts refers to an exploding missile. And that's how it hits you, man. When the devil hits you with a lie, it explodes emotionally and in your head, but faith out front will break it. All right, listen, those fiery darts may be coming at you, but you've got us, you've got other people standing with you. That's what you need. You need friends that have faith, that can help you when you're going through the battle. Our chat rooms that we have, our social media arrangement is so that we could build that community, because together we're pursuing the ultimate life strategy. You're not alone. You're in a community. You're not isolated. Your faith may be weak. Our faith is strong. Let's combine it together. Go to level10living.com. Use the podcast code Lance and focus on getting this module. If you want to start with one, you don't want to do all four, make sure you get your ultimate life strategy. It's cracking the convergence code. That literally means how to crack the code for living now in the fulfillment of what God called you to do. You don't have to wallow in misery. You can have a victory today. Get Level 10 Living.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world.